Hi, good afternoon. This is Carrie Henderson, Executive Vice Chancellor for the Florida College System, and we are pleased to welcome you to a discussion with the Councils of Student and Academic Affairs on Florida's environmental scan for the Florida Student Success webinar. We were pleased to launch the Student Success Center earlier this year, and as we embark on the work of the Student Success Center, we wanted to engage the councils in a discussion about how the findings of an environmental scan related to Florida and Guided Pathways implementation may inform the work of the work groups over the next year. I'd like to now introduce the Florida College System and Student Success Center staff on the webinar today. Again, this is Carrie Henderson, Executive Vice Chancellor, and I'm joined by my colleague, Naomi, who is Executive Director of the Florida Student Success Center. For today's webinar, Naomi will provide an overview of Florida Student Success Center and the work that we plan to do over the next several years. Next, Achieving the Dream, the firm that was contracted to conduct the environmental scan, will share the results of their Guided Pathways environmental scan in Florida. And then we will turn it over to Julie Alexander and Marie DeSantis, leaders of the Councils of Instructional and Student Affairs, to engage with you in a discussion about how CIA and CSA may use the results of the environmental scan to engage with the working groups under those councils this year. Before we begin, I wanted to go over some webinar logistics. During this call, all participants will be on mute. The orange arrow button on your control panel will help expand or minimize your panel. Today's webinar will be recorded and the material will be made available on the floridacollegesystem.com website. In your panel, you should see handouts area where you will find a copy of today's slide presentation, the Achieving the Dream environmental scan, as well as supplemental information from Achieving the Dream, including the methodology for conducting the environmental scan. If you have any questions during today's webinar, please submit them in the question chat box. During the question and answer portion at the end of the webinar, we will answer your questions. At this time, it is my pleasure to turn it over to Naomi Sleep, Executive Director of the Florida Student Success Center.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Naomi Sleep. Thank you, Dr. Henderson, for the introduction. Thank you all for joining us today. As Dr. Henderson said, earlier this year, the Florida College System launched the Florida Student Success Center in partnership with Jobs for the Future, Helios Education Foundation, and the Florida College System Foundation. Our role is to support institutional initiatives that improve college completion and promote student success. The vision of the Florida Student Success Center is to serve as a resource of evidence-based, innovative practices, and timely information for colleges to support our colleges and advance best practices. The work of Florida Student Success Center is guided by an advisory board. Their role is to champion the work of the center, informing stakeholders of the center's activities and providing opportunities for broad stakeholder input. The board is comprised of members from our colleges like presidents, faculty, students, instructional and student affairs staff, and then our partners in the K-12 and the state university system, as well as members from the research, policy, business, and industry sectors. A diverse and broad and engaged board. Student Success Centers are established to serve as a statewide organization that supports colleges' efforts to develop student-centered pathways and increase student completion rates. Centers serve to help colleges align priorities and maximize resources to really help initiatives move beyond pilot to scale, as well as to present the voice of practitioners in policy discussions. By establishing a Student Success Center, Florida joins 14 other states in a national Student Success Center network, a learning community to promote best practices and collaboration around student success. Florida Student Success Center supports our colleges through 5 key functions: providing coherence, connecting policy and practice, efforts to convene, improving data capacity, and promoting research and knowledge development, the 5 pillars of support. Under the pillar of convene, the Success Center is preparing to formally launch this September Mathematics Pathways work groups, creating purpose-driven work groups that bring together practitioners from our colleges to convene and discuss policies and practices that support student success around mathematics. Mathematics is an important and foundational subject for our students, but we are increasingly finding that mathematics has become a barrier for many post-secondary students. Mathematics Pathways Redesign and Content Alignment is a primary initiative of the Florida Student Success Center under the leadership of Executive Vice Chancellor Dr. Carrie Henderson. Mathematics and statistics faculty, administrators, and key stakeholders will participate in 3 interconnected work groups to align mathematics content and pathways that best prepare students for their intended academic and career goals. The 3 groups include the high school to college alignment, looking at math sequencing within the Florida college system, and then the alignment for our students who transfer from the Florida college system to the state university system. These work groups will collaborate to identify current challenges in mathematics pathways and develop policy and practice recommendations to improve student achievement across our education system. Those policy and practice recommendations will be shared at the Mathematics Institute in June of 2019. As the work of the mathematics work groups gets underway, we'll keep you all informed of our work through webinars, newsletters, and opportunities for you to engage with us. Under the pillar of providing coherence, the Florida Student Success Center contracted with Achieving the Dream to conduct an environmental scan, asking Achieving the Dream to examine our institutions to summarize the student success initiatives we're currently engaged in around guided pathways work, as well as to identify areas of opportunities to strengthen guided pathways implementation. To conduct the scan, Achieving the Dream reviewed state and local documents provided by the Florida College System, engaged in phone calls with Florida College System staff, and leveraged websites to gather additional information. As such, the environmental scan is intended to be used as a living document that is updated with the ongoing work of Florida's colleges. In June, Achieving the Dream visited Florida to share the results of the environmental scan with the Council of Presidents and with the Florida Student Success Center Advisory Board. We are fortunate to have them join us again today for our webinar with the Council of Instructional Affairs and the Council of Student Affairs. At this time, I'd like to introduce our speakers from Achieving the Dream, who will discuss the environmental scan findings with us today. Joining us from Achieving the Dream is Lori Heacock, Vice President of Data, Technology, and Analytics, Meredith Hatch, Senior Associate Director for Workforce and Academic Alignment, and Susan Mayer, Chief Learning Officer. Thank you for joining us today, and I'll turn it over to Achieving the Dream at this time.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Naomi. This is Meredith Hatch from Achieving the Dream. If we look at the next slide, you'll see the objectives for today's webinar. First, we'll share some high-level findings from the environmental scan. And Naomi spoke a little bit about the methodology, and just a reminder, you can find more information about the methodology and the environmental scan as handouts on the side of your screen. We'll also identify in the webinar, identify some areas for further progress in improving student outcomes. And finally, like Naomi said, the scan is a living document to be developed, to be used. And so a really important objective for today's webinar is mapping the environmental scan findings and recommendations for your CIA and CSA teams. We go to the next slide about the methodology. Achieving the Dream used the Guided Pathways framework really to inform the scan. And so when we go to the next slide, you'll see we use these 4 pillars of guided pathways. First, clarifying. So clarifying educational pathways that develop skills and talent to match labor market needs. The next pillar that we use to organize the scan, intake, to help students choose and get on a pathway. The third is support, so supporting students to stay on the pathway and to complete. And finally, learning, really ensuring that students are learning and mastering knowledge and skills. We know that these are critically important to each of you and each of your institutions. So to start with some high-level findings of the environmental scan, Achieving the Dream found that the 28 Florida colleges are employing educational and institutional strategies that are key to making progress in implementing guided pathways at scale. A few highlights of your college's good work appear on this slide. So we saw that onboarding is particularly strong for your first time in college students. Nearly all of the colleges in Florida are requiring mandatory orientation for first-time college students. We also know that more than half of your colleges require students to take a student success course. We saw that your institutions are increasingly mapping academic programs to meta-major career areas. And we saw that your colleges really have a strong and intentional focus on redesigning gateway courses, particularly gateway courses in English and math, to increase student success in these courses. We noticed that every single one of the 28 Florida colleges offers some form of career coaching for students. So this includes web-based assessments of students' areas of interest, and nearly 3/4 of your colleges are requiring students to select an area of interest or meta-major as part of their application to your institution. We saw that academic supports are particularly strong and across the board. So we saw that colleges are offering academic supports like peer tutoring, like mentoring. So nearly all of your institutions are offering virtual tutoring, and nearly 1/4 of your colleges are nudging students. So perhaps using technology to do so, but to complete specific tasks. And over half of your colleges match students to mentors. Achieving the Dream is very, very focused on using data, and we were pleased to see that your colleges are disaggregating data and monitoring student success metrics to identify gaps in student outcomes. We saw, particularly in your college's state equity report, a really comprehensive focus on monitoring student success metrics disaggregated by demographic groups. We saw that your colleges are providing financial supports for completion, and almost half of your colleges are providing a scholarship for the last class that is needed for a student to complete their college credential. And we also saw that nearly 3/4 of your colleges are implementing auto-graduation for students to support completion. So those, again, are some of the high-level findings of the environmental scan. Now I'm going to pass it to Susan Mayer, who's going to talk about opportunities and recommendations.
Thank you, Meredith. I'm going to try and take this down to the next level and building on the strengths that Meredith just identified, starting with the next slide, identify some opportunities for some further progress and suggest some areas for support of the CIA and CSA teams going forward. So first of all, while most of the focus today is still on first time in college, particularly first time in college from high school students, and they represent a large percentage of the incoming class for sure every year, as you know, they're a small percentage of the total population of the colleges in the state, and the progression and retention challenges are greater among those students who have been at the institution for a while. And so an opportunity for additional support is the inclusion of other groups of students beyond the first time in college students, particularly adult learners, part-time students, students who persist but don't earn credentials, and students who stop or drop out. So many of you have seen these waterfall progressions of your student populations and including them in the strong holistic supports that you're providing to first time in college students will likely yield additional improvement in the performance outcomes and metrics. Secondly, it's very difficult right now to identify the best practices in advising because everybody is using different definitions and different language to describe the advising support that they're providing to services. And so our recommendation is to build some consensus around common languages and definitions so that you can identify and scale the most successful practices and strategies. There is a lot going on. It's just difficult right now to determine what are the practices that should be scaled. And as Meredith said, there's a significant amount of work going on in both academic and student services supports. They're not as integrated as they probably need to be, and the alignment with pathways as the pathways work continues will provide stronger integrated support for the students in each one of these student categories. Finally, in many ways, Florida is at the forefront of a lot of this student success reform work because the articulation agreements and the common numbering systems have been in place for so long. But there are unique opportunities because of that from the colleges to learn from each other and to drive this work to the next level. So what I'd like to do now is to dive a little bit more deeply into each one of those 4 pathways pathways pillars, and to provide slightly more detail on where we saw progress being made today and opportunities that we've defined for the Florida colleges to consider pursuing based on some of the diversity we see within the state and some of the best practices we see nationwide. So if we look at start out by looking at clarifying educational pathways, and think about those pathways as not just being the mapping of courses in sequences, but as pathways that match the skills and the talent of needs of the local labor markets, local and statewide labor markets. Additional work is being done currently to map stackable AS and AAS programs, but there's additional focus that could be put to mapping those pathways to labor market outcomes, and particularly to high-wage, low-wage career pathways. As we know, a large percentage of our students in the state of Florida are low-income students. And what we found nationally is that there is often a tendency to offer career pathways for students, for these students that don't provide the economic and social mobility to allow these students to achieve middle-class status. And so thinking about even within a meta major, what are the career pathways that are more likely than not to raise quintile economic value for students over time, and also to map part-time maps for students. Many of the colleges in the state have a majority of students who are attending part-time. In some cases, that may be as high as 60 or 70%. And most of the maps that have been done to date, not just in Florida, but nationwide, are for full-time students, despite the fact that the majority of students are not attending full-time. And that doesn't necessarily mean that the students take 7 or 8 years for a 2-year program, but it can have an impact on course scheduling, so accelerated instructional formats and other types of ways of achieving full-time credential completion for students who are attending part-time are a natural outgrowth of thinking about part-time student maps and labor market outcomes. Some of you are starting to think about stacking AA programs and contextualizing courses, specifically within meta majors, and that's very encouraging. And we're starting to see, particularly in states in the Midwest, some real alignment between academic programs and both prior learning assessment and competency-based education. And we encourage you to reach out to some of the work that's being done, particularly in Wisconsin, where they have completely re-envisioned prior learning assessments to be competency-based and to be able to provide support for more adult learners and students who are returning to college, or students who come with significant experience and need retraining, giving them an opportunity to hit the ground running with some credits under their belt. So moving now to helping students get on the pathway. As Meredith has said, there's significant evidence of meta-major orientations and first-year advising courses, first-year experience courses tied with first-year advising, particularly for those students who are coming to the colleges directly from high school. And we were pleased to see that colleges are measuring some of the early momentum metrics like completion of college level math and English in the first year, number of credits completed versus credits attempted, which have been shown nationwide to be good leading indicators of longer term retention and progression metrics. So that's a real positive. As we mentioned in a couple of slides ago, this intentional onboarding would benefit all students, not just those coming directly from high school. And we would strongly encourage both of your CIA and CSA to focus on career exploration at or before enrollment, partnering with K through 12 to do career exploration in the high schools, to tie program of study choice at application more directly to students' goals and interests, and particularly to focus on high-wage, low-wage career paths for students, especially those who come with backgrounds of poverty and low income. We would recommend, based on work we've seen in a number of other states, a tighter linking of the first-year advising and the first-year experience cores, so they build on and reinforce each other, and that students get considerable reinforcement for career pathways thinking in that combination of first-year advising and the first-year experience. And as we all know, a large percentage of our student population faces insecurity in a number of different areas: financial insecurity, food insecurity, housing insecurity, transportation insecurity. And what we're seeing now is much more of an intentional assessment of these non-cognitive factors as students enter and throughout their journey to completion, so that we're providing them not only with advising support, but with these types of supports to ensure that the conditions are created for them to be successful in class when they show up in class. If we could now move on to support, which is the area nationally, I would tell you, not just in Florida, where colleges are struggling. This is retention and progression and completion and keeping students on the pathway. Generally speaking, colleges are doing a great job of getting students onto pathways or getting them to have a much more intentional first-year experience. But keeping students retained and keeping students on the track to completion is going to require some more holistic and integrated advising, in which early alert and intervention systems are integrated with what goes on in the classroom as well as what goes on in advising. And then importantly, the supports for students are equitable. And what we mean by equitable is that the student support system is designed to the needs of the students. So using data analytics, using segmentation, identifying students who have different needs, students who have more risk factors in one area than other students, students who come with academic readiness needs, or students who have financial insecurity needs, and designing supports equitably for those based on what we know about them. The good news is in Florida, there's a lot of information available in the high school systems. Some of you have already been able to integrate that using technology into your CRMs, but it's becoming increasingly clear that one size fits all is not the best support structure for our students. And so we encourage expanded collaboration and partnerships between academic and student services, specifically in areas like increased information sharing, joint definition of rules around interventions and monitoring the impact of those interventions, and starting to look at progression metrics, so moving from early momentum to progression metrics like fall-to-fall retention and credits completed over a longer period of time. And then finally, the last pathways pillar is ensuring that students master the knowledge and the skills to be successful in the labor market. Even those who transfer ultimately are going to be in the labor market. So building that foundation through today course learning outcomes and faculty professional development to improve pedagogy, instructional strategy, and do curriculum redesign. We would encourage a shift from course learning outcomes to program learning outcomes, where interdisciplinary attention is paid to focus on skills and talent development and the critical skills that employers are going to need going forward. Co-curricular alignment with student learning outcomes, so opportunities for internships and apprenticeships and research, particularly in STEM fields, is built into the pathways for students. That all faculty, specifically adjunct faculty, are included in professional development opportunities. That faculty, just like students, need pathways for their own professional development, helping think through what that pathway for a faculty creation of additional excellence in teaching and learning looks like. And then course redesign that includes not just innovations in pedagogy and instructional strategy, but also uses technology like open educational resources and adaptive learning where appropriate to ensure that students master the knowledge and the skills. And so if we look at the graphic on the next page, the pathways that we just talked about are the chevrons, the purple, gold, blue, and green chevrons in this circle. And we talked about strategies to support students to be more successful in each one of those areas. At the center of this graphic are 7 key institutional capacities, which have proven to be necessary for large-scale transformative change, which is what you're all undertaking. Many of you have made enormous progress and been working on this for years, and you know that it's a commitment to teaching and learning, embedding equity at every stage of the way, and aligning your policies and practices that are key, not only to develop the most appropriate strategies for student success, but to be able to build additional institutional capacity to sustain that change over time. And so now what we're going to try and do is to align what we just talked about with the CIA and CSA structure. And let me take a minute and explain the template before we add the content in the middle. Along the horizontal axis is the Florida College Description System Priorities. So this is guided pathways broken down into each of the 4 pillars that we just discussed. So clarifying the pathways, getting on the pathways, and embedded in guided pathways are the mathematics pathways that Naomi talked about earlier, and the holistic advising redesign, which you are going to tackle going forward. And on the vertical axis, we've displayed the CIA and CSA committees. And as we thought about this, they seem to us to be innovation hubs where prototypes are developed and best practice is shared, and learning is consolidated to successfully implement guided pathways. And for those of you on the innovation team, the reason that you're in the cloud around here is that we think just like data and evidence and scale and systems thinking, you're embedded in everything that it goes on in implementing this framework. And so you have sort of a special place in all of this because you're part of every single one of these cells in this matrix. And so on the final slide of our presentation, what we've done is to try and map the recommendations that we made, the findings, first of all, on what you're doing well today, and the recommendations for further progress to this this map of the Florida Success Priorities and the way you're aligned to do the work. I will tell you that there are probably some mistakes in this mapping because you know this much better than we do, but we took an attempt to map this out as a straw man for you to use, hopefully to have some discussions about your focus going forward and your priorities as you think about what you can accomplish over the next year or 2 years. And so we'll start first with these program strategies and interventions that are colored black in here. For example, you can see under articulation and clarify pathways, we have math pathways. So what we've tried to do is to identify either work that is currently underway or work that we think can be accomplished in the near term being defined as probably a year. So you see a couple of different examples. So for example, under affordability and clarify pathways is dual enrollment. Florida's been doing dual enrollment for a long time. You've expanded and evolved and improved dual enrollment. That's a positive strategy where you, in many cases, lead the nation. Another example is work that's in process. So as Naomi said, the Math Pathways Initiative is getting kicked off in September. Many of the colleges have already implemented Math Pathways, and learning will be accumulated over the course of the next year, and colleges will share best practices and scale those Math Pathways. And then a third area is a strategy or a program or an initiative that we think can be added relatively quickly. And if you look down under programs, which we know is just a CIA team under Clarify Pathways, again, you'll see we've added high wage, low wage related to economic mobility. And while you may not be able to map all of the pathways with co-curricular activities in the near term, you can very quickly identify high, low wage career paths and begin to build that into not just the career pathways, but probably almost even more fundamentally the advising that students get at orientation and in the first year and in the first year experience course. So if we could move to the next category, which is gray, these are initiatives, strategies, and activities which we believe can be addressed in the medium term. And these include things like under affordability, open educational resources would be a good example. Some of you already are participating in programs that have brought open educational resources benefits to students. Hundreds of millions of dollars are being saved nationwide by students who have access to these open source materials. And in a recent study, we found, and I'm sure many of you have seen the same data, that not only are students saving money, but they're being more successful in the courses because they have instructional materials on the first day of class, as opposed to waiting a week or 2 weeks to go and buy a book at the bookstore. And so there are other areas, career exploration before making a program choice, we think is something that can be implemented, particularly in partnership with high schools in the medium term. And another area that I would point out under stay on the pathway and complete and affordability is alternate pathways. And alternate pathways are what many of you are already doing with nursing students and other students in highly selective career pathways, where it's become clear to your advisors or your faculty mentors that students will have a very difficult time being accepted into the program, the baccalaureate or the pre-select program at the community college that they had hoped to achieve. And so you're having intentional, proactive discussions with them about maximizing their credits in a related field of study that may give them similar types of goal achievement, but maybe more realistic. So again, these may not be all in the right boxes, but these are areas that, based on the scan, we think are probably achievable in the next couple of years. And then finally, the last category is those strategies and activities and initiatives that are colored in white. And these have a longer time frame associated with them. So for example, developing programs that maximize interdisciplinary talent and skill development will require some curricular redesign. And that's a long-term collaborative process among faculty. And employee partnerships that embed the ability for students to earn professional development on the job that then can later be translated into prior learning assessment competency-based credit, like they're doing in Wisconsin, is going to take longer because it's a different approach of dealing with employers than in the past. So again, this is meant to be a teaser to give you some ideas to think about as you plan out your work for next year and identify your priorities. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Julie and Marie, who will talk about next steps.
Thank you, Susan, so much. We were very pleased that Achieving the Dream was able to share those findings and provide just a little bit about potential areas and opportunities for the work in both the short term and long term for the committees underneath the Council of Instructional Affairs and the Council of Student Affairs. And so to continue the discussion of aligning that work, I'd like to introduce our leadership of CIA CSA. On this call with us today, we have our chair, Julie Alexander, of the Council of Instructional Affairs, and then also our chair of the Student Affairs, Dr. Marie DeSanctis. So I'd like to go ahead and turn it over to them at this time to continue the discussion.
Thank you so much, Naomi. This is Julie Alexander, and I'm the incoming chair of the CIA. I'm so excited that I can say that. It's really cool, and this is my first official duty as chair. So I want to thank the Division of Florida Colleges, the Student Success Center, and Achieving the Dream for offering CIA and CSA an opportunity to join the webinar. In fact, it was bred, this idea of a webinar was bred out of conversations between Marie and I with Naomi, and they were able, the Student Success Center was able, with the Division of Florida Colleges, to encourage Achieving the Dream or invite Achieving the Dream to provide an overview of their environmental scan. And I really do want to thank Achieving the Dream, not only for accepting the invitation by the division to do this environmental scan, but for this presentation. A special thanks to Meredith, Lori, and Susan. And if I might take a personal privilege, just for the CIA and CSA stakeholders out on the phone or the webinar, Susan is well known to me, to Miami-Dade College. And if it wasn't evident by her presentation here on the webinar, I can tell you that she is extremely knowledgeable about what's going on from a national level, but even at a state level, she is aware of what's going on with the Florida college system institutions, and even more intimately aware of what's going on at Miami-Dade College. She, via our completion by design work with the Gates Foundation, Susan was very instrumental for years in helping to organize and lead our strategic achievement initiatives, which have led to much success as on the heels of the reform efforts that were somewhat renegotiated after Senate Bill 1720. So it's great to have Susan and the Achieving the Dream team engaged in this work. And that for those of you who haven't seen it, in the webinar, there are attachments included, and I know that was mentioned up front, but the full environmental scan report is included as an attachment. And I really do encourage you all to read it, because it demonstrates that the Florida college system is doing a lot of work, a lot of good work. So now I'll go back to my official portion of the webinar. And I really do appreciate also the fact that ATD took our framework, our committee structure framework, and provided us just a sort of a snapshot of how our current activities, as they discovered through their environmental scan, fit into the pathway framework. So I think that's going to be really helpful. Last year, CIA and CSA developed work groups to strategically coordinate efforts, ideas, and recommendations that would be presented to the Council of Presidents for consideration. I want to recognize the outstanding work of our past CIA chair, Jesse Coraggio from St. Pete College. He, for CIA, was really an excellent advocate for this committee structure and led us in the new structure in setting its charge. The intent of the committee structure is to ensure that we're serving COP in a strategic and transparent way, and the Florida college system, so that we're and then up to the Council of Presidents. While the first year of the work group's structure was really successful, and I think it was, we had some really engaging conversations and some really important ideas. I'll just give you one example, just to remind folks about that. We talked a lot about, and CSA kind of prompted this conversation, and CIA joined in. We talked a lot about students, because we are, and it was documented in one of the previous slides, because we are rightfully so auto graduating students. There are some students that are getting caught in a financial aid no man's land, if you will, so particularly for AA graduates, they're getting auto graduated before they've completed potentially all of their common prerequisites, and so they're not able to get into the program of interest at at the university that they want to attend, and they're not eligible to continue within their program of study at the community college, at the Florida College System institution. And so they've got common prerequisites to complete, no program of study to tie them to, and so they're not financial aid eligible for those particular credits. That becomes quite a monumental barrier for many of the students that we serve, as you know. And so in our conversations at the last CIA CSA meeting, one action item that we described, that we identified doing is having conversations with the Florida Council for Resource Development, FCRD, to see if there are potential resources out there that we can bring to bear to help in these situations, to help students get the courses that they need so that they're then eligible for admission into the baccalaureate programs that they're interested in pursuing. So that's just an example of some of the conversation and decision making that we have undergone last year with the CIA CSA work groups. So that's one example, but there's still a long way to go. If we continue to work collaboratively, there's, the sky's the limit. So having said that, Marie and I are re-engaging the work groups and re-engaging the subcommittees. And for CIA, the last year's chairs, for the most part, may continue, but we're really wanting to broaden the net and engage many more CIA members in the subcommittee work. And so what I'm going to do is ask that any CIA member that would like to participate in any of these CIA committees listed on the webinar, affordability, articulation, innovation, programs, retention and completion, please email me, and you'll see my email address a little bit later. But please email me and let me know. And also, let me know if you have any particular ideas or concerns or policy recommendations in that email. But I'm welcoming you to let me know if you'd like to participate. We also want to leverage the environmental scan and ATD's alignment framework to help set the stage for the coming academic year for the CIA work groups. And we'll incorporate a review of the document in the subcommittee work leading up to the October CIA meeting. So I want to now kick it off to Dr. DeSanctis to talk from the CSA angle.
Thank you, Julie. Good afternoon, everyone. Marie DeSanctis, incredibly humbled to be representing the Council of Student Affairs this year and Broward College in its process. I certainly want to acknowledge and thank our Chancellor, Madeline Pumariega, and her staff for their vision in not only bringing ATD on, but engaging in the work of the Florida Student Success Center and joining a nation of states that are engaged in making sure that all of the institutions within our state are engaged in really great work in making sure that high tides rise all boats. So I thank them in particular, and really thank ATD and the Chancellor's Office staff for bringing us all together so that we can clearly see that all of this work fits together, is completely aligned, and that they are not disparate initiatives that we're undertaking, whether that's from the Chancellor's Office, the Florida Success Center, or the work here of CIA and CSA that Julie has already spoken a bit about. I certainly also would be remiss to not thank Christine Davis, our former chair of CSA, who really was instrumental, and even our immediate past chair, Patrick Renard, for launching us into this committee structure and giving a much more structured framework to the work of CIA and CSA, and in particular bringing us even closer and closer together. So hopefully you have, if you are a CSA member, you have received some emails from CSA that had a link embedded in them that included a survey of an interest to serve on one of these committees and or some professional learning modules that we will be launching for CSA members this year. As Julie said, we really want to engage CSA beyond the 3 meetings a year. We want to engage CSA beyond the people that traditionally are able to attend. We understand tight travel dollars and want to find a way this year to keep CIA and CSA engaged, talking with each other and moving work forward through these committees and recommendations and truly serving COP with some Council of Presidents, with some really great recommendations for either policy or practices within our 28 institutions. So if you did receive that CSA email and you have been putting it on your to-do list and didn't cross it off yet, that survey link is still open. Find it in your inbox somewhere and click on that link. If you did not receive the CSA email, our contact information is on the slide prior to this one. I invite you also to email me so that we can add you to the CSA listserv and send you this link. And if you are not somebody that considers yourself part of student affairs, I am here to tell you that we are all part of student affairs because we all are here only because of students. So if you are in some category that is just outside of the fringes of whatever building on your campus, your institution is titled the Student Affairs Building, we welcome you too. So send me an email. We would love to have you involved in our committees. We would love to have you involved in our professional learning activities and certainly love to engage you at the CSA meetings 3 times a year. And with that, I will turn it back over to the Florida College System staff.
Thank you, Julie and Marie. Thank you both for joining us and for engaging the members of the Council of Instructional Affairs and the Council of Student Affairs. At this time, I think we're going to open up the webinar for some question and answers. Just as a reminder to please use your question box feature in your panel to submit your questions for our speakers today. We also, as Julie mentioned, in your control panel, you should see a handouts area where you can obtain copies of today's material, such as the presentation, a full copy of the environmental scan that Achieving the Dream conducted, and then also the supplemental material from Achieving the Dream regarding the methodology for the environmental scan. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be made available along with all the material afterwards, just as a reminder for everyone. So I think we'll start. We've had a couple questions about some stackable AA programs. So I think what we'll do is kind of address that question first, and I'll ask Achieving the Dream if they could respond, talking a little bit about the question being that since Florida only allows 1 AA, what do you mean by a stackable AA program, and what are some ways that we may be able to utilize those?
So while it's true that Florida has only 1 AA program, several of the colleges have developed pathways towards an AA degree, so a pathway in chemistry towards an AA degree or a pathway in political science towards an AA degree. So while chemistry's, the common prerequisites and the other courses that are required in chemistry to enable a student to be able to transfer not only with junior status, but also to be as well prepared for junior status in chemistry as the native students at the institutions. In the chemistry pathway, it's probably unlikely that there would be rooms to stack certificates. But if you take some of the social sciences AA degrees, for example, anthropology, political science, history, some of the others, there's a significant number of elective credits in those pathways today, where potentially certificates in areas, some colleges do things in leadership, some colleges do things in civic engagement, in entrepreneurship, that makes students competitively differentiated when they apply to upper division or when they seek employment if they're going part-time.
Thank you, Susan.
Yes, and our next question we're going to direct to Julie. This is a question about how institutions are currently addressing the issue with auto-grading of students who still have prerequisites left, and I think that's auto-graduating of students who have common prerequisites. This institution is considering going back to having students apply for graduation and then identifying students who are eligible but did not apply and working with them on whether or not they should graduate. Julie, do you have any thoughts on this, and is this perhaps a discussion to be had in October at CIA-CSA?
I think it's a great discussion to have in October. I got a lot of thoughts about it. I think I think that many colleges, and I don't know the number, but I would like to know, many colleges have moved towards this automatically processing degrees on the basis of students achieving the very basic general requirements. And for the AA, what that means is 36 hours in general education within the parameters that we have set for us, and 24-hour open kind of credit hours of potentially of electives. And so students are progressing, and maybe some of us are just now really realizing the benefits of providing very clearly articulated course sequence guides, course sequences, and students, didn't have all the information about the program of study and the courses that would lead them to be ready for their baccalaureate degree program, and so they're getting auto-graduated before they get to that point. And so I really can understand an institution that may be reevaluating that automatic processing. I think that there's another side to it in the interest of being student friendly and student oriented, to allow them to pick up those common prerequisites that they need while under the financial aid umbrella. But on the other side, we are really, there are outside forces that are encouraging us to, or compelling us really, to look at retention, to look at completion much more strategically. And I think that those compelling reasons may in some ways direct us to look at alternatives for students. And one of those ways, the Division of Florida Colleges is really helping, and that is looking at the Common Prerequisite Manual. And for those of you that were at, I think it was not the June CIA meeting, but the previous CIA-CSA meeting, there was a presentation of an analysis of the Common Prerequisite Manual, and it was very, very illuminating that there, and I'm not going to know the statistics off the top of my head, but there are many programs or tracks within the Common Prerequisite Manual where the number of credits of common prerequisites extends beyond the 24 credits, which would be the elective block of the AA. So I really think that this is a multi-tiered problem to tackle, and I'm putting it on the plan for the agenda at the October meeting.
Excellent. And Marie, do you have any thoughts from the CSA perspective?
I do, thank you. So first and foremost, I think this is definitely going to be a big agenda item for CIA-CSA. Having just endured, we'll call it, a quite rigorous program review from the U.S. Department of Education, I can tell you that not auto-grading students is not the answer here. The U.S. Department of Education has been crystal clear that as soon as a student has met the requirements for graduation, an institution playing the game, so to speak, of just not graduating them to let them continue to take credits is going to land that institution in a whole mess of hot water. So that is certainly not the answer. I think aligned to this notion of the common prerequisite manual, though, is that I think our institutions are going to have to take a closer look at the restrictions that we have placed on students in the 36 hours of gen ed. Florida state statute, while there are 36 hours of gen ed, only really prescribes about 15 credit hours. And traditionally, our institutions at the college level have been incredibly more prescriptive in parsing out the rest of those hours. And we probably need to take a deep dive into those programs that have more than 24 electives and 24 credit hours of electives, and how many of those, let's call them elective hours beyond 24, could have been fit into a general ed requirement as well. And I think that number would significantly shrink if we took that view. But certainly something we need to talk about at CIA, CSA, and certainly worthy of conversation, because it is significantly impacting students, particularly those students that have aspirations in our STEM fields, be that architecture, engineering. They are significantly being impacted. And as a former STEM graduate, this is near and dear to my heart.
Thank you, Marie. We did have a follow-up question, and the question is, even if a student is not graduated as a result of auto-graduation, would POEC, program objective enrollment compliance, not come into play and prevent financial aid from awarding, as any remaining prereqs will not fall within the degree? And that may be a more technical question we want to address when we meet in October.
Naomi, this is Marie. I didn't really understand the question, but it sounds like somebody's asking, because of program objective enrollment compliance, otherwise affectionately known as POEC, that a student, once they've completed courses that the institution views as 36 hours of gen ed and 24 hours of electives, at that point, they're getting kicked out from not receiving aid. Which is 100% true. That is completely aligned to the regulations within the U.S. Department of Education Office of Financial Aid. You can only receive aid for courses that advance you towards your degree. And once you have completed all of your degree requirements, financial aid is no longer available to you.
Thank you, Marie.
And if I might, this is Julie, I might just offer, so Dr. Renard, St. Pete College, I think in collaboration with CSA, and Marie, you can correct me if this is setting it up wrong, but there is a white paper that really describes well this whole scenario, and then provides some examples, very specific examples. And I don't know if both CIA and CSA members have received a copy of it. So I think that maybe Marie or myself, or maybe we can share it with the division to distribute it more widely. But it does a very good job of explaining this problem.
Thank you, Julie. So it looks like there's a couple other questions, a little bit about clarifying a little bit about auto-graduation responses, and whether or not the institution may or may not get into trouble for that process. And I think that you've talked a little bit about taking a deeper dive into some of those institutional questions at the October meeting. So I'll go ahead and allow that to kind of be picked up there on your agenda for further discussion. Since we're coming close to the end of our webinar, I think I just wanted to thank you all for being with us today, and just remind you that we do have a Student Success Center website found at www.floridacollegesystem.com, where you can find information about the center, resources for guided pathways work, information on our mathematics work that we spoke about earlier, and where our webinars will be posted. And as a reminder, we will be following up after today's webinar to provide all the materials that were presented, along with a recording of this webinar and want to thank you all so much for joining us today. Thank you to Achieving the Dream. Thank you to Julie and Marie for being a part of it, and happy to be involved in the work with the Council of Instructional Affairs and the Council of Student Affairs. Hope you all have a great afternoon, and thank you for being with us.